At 29, I packed away my teaching degree, thinking I'd be back in a year. Just a year. That was 44 years ago. I never went back. And no one, not my husband, not my son, ever asked if I missed it. They just assumed I didn't. Last week, at the reading of my husband's will, my son stood in front of our entire family and said, "If she gets a share, I walk." I stayed silent because he had no idea. I already owned everything. My name is Eleanor Hartley. I'm 73 years old. If I sound tired, it's because I am. Not in the way you're thinking, not the aches of old bones or the quiet kind of tired that comes with age. No, I'm tired the way a person gets when they've spent a lifetime being invisible in their own story. I met Peter when I was 25. He was charming, loud, stubborn, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make people laugh without trying. I was the opposite. Quiet, a planner, someone who always kept 2 to-do lists and still worried I forgot something. He called me steady as a sunrise. That was his favorite compliment. We got married in 1976, bought a tiny starter house, and lived off boxed mac and cheese for longer than I'd care to admit. I was teaching 3rd grade then, loved it. I wasn't just good at it, I was alive in that classroom. Then Peter got his big idea. He wanted to open a machining company. He was good with tools, good with people, but terrible with money and paperwork. I told him we could try it, as long as I kept teaching. He smiled and said, "Just give me a year." I gave him 44. At first, I just helped a little, balanced the books, brought coffee during late-night welding jobs, took calls while grading papers. But the school hours clashed with his growing business, and before long, I found myself handing in my resignation with trembling hands. "Just until the business stabilizes," I told my principal. We both knew I wasn't coming back. I became everything: receptionist, scheduler, event planner, emergency, parts runner, and unofficial therapist when employees cried on the job. I hosted dinners to impress clients, prepped spreadsheets Peter couldn't read, and whispered suggestions he later repeated like they were his own. And I never complained, because it was for us, for the family, for our future. When our son Ryan was born, I did what mothers did. I stayed home. I didn't want to at first. I had just figured out how to keep the company's books in order, and I missed the classroom every day. But back then, wanting anything for myself felt selfish, so I wrapped my life tighter around theirs. Ryan grew up believing his father was the empire builder, and I was just the soft woman who made lunch. I don't think he ever saw me in any other light, not because I didn't shine, but because no one ever bothered to look. Peter made sure Ryan had every advantage: private schools, tutors, a brand new Mustang on his 16th birthday. When I raised concerns, I was too cautious, too negative, too afraid of risk. Ryan joined the company straight out of college. No interviews, no questions, just walked in and got a VP title. I bit my tongue and smiled, because that's what wives do. That's what mothers do. I had this fantasy, though, that maybe, just maybe, one day when Peter was ready to retire, he'd say, "We built this together, Elle. You deserve credit too." But that moment never came. He got sick 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that doesn't give you a chance to prepare. And still, even in those last months, I kept hoping for acknowledgement. A word. A thank you. Instead, we sat through meetings with lawyers where my name was never even mentioned. Every time someone said legacy, I disappeared a little more. Peter passed away in January, and in the weeks that followed, I wandered through our big empty house like a guest. Ryan took control of everything: the company, the memorial, the estate arrangements. He moved through it all like a CEO delegating grief. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would shift at the will reading. But instead, Ryan stood up in front of everyone and said, without a flicker of shame, "If that woman gets a share, I walk. She didn't build this. Dad did, I did. She just tagged along." I looked around the room. Some faces were surprised. Most just looked away, like I was something awkward they didn't want to deal with. No one said a word in my defense. No one reminded him I was there for every payroll crisis, every supplier fallout, every broken machine and employee meltdown. No one reminded him that when Peter collapsed in his office from sheer exhaustion, I was the one who carried him to the car. No one remembered that I gave up my dreams so his could survive. And so I sat still. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. Because I knew something Ryan didn't. Peter and I had one honest conversation about a year before he died. He told me he was sorry, that he knew he had made me small so he could feel bigger, that he let Ryan become someone entitled and hollow. He told me he wanted to fix it, that he'd made arrangements. I didn't ask for details. Part of me didn't believe he would really follow through, but sitting in that boardroom watching my son erase me in front of our family, I realized something. This wasn't just my life anymore. This was the beginning of a revenge story I never intended to write. Not out of anger, but out of truth. The kind of story where quiet justice speaks louder than rage. And it wasn't for me, not really. It was for every woman who'd ever been told her sacrifices didn't count. For every mother made to feel like she was just the support act. I don't know what Ryan expected, but he certainly didn't expect that I was the one holding all the cards. It's funny. You can give someone your life, and they'll still look you in the eye one day and ask what you've done for them. That moment came for me at exactly 2:11 p.m. in the cold boardroom of Whitmore and Lee Law. My son Ryan, standing at the head of the table like he was delivering a quarterly report, said, "If she gets a share, I walk. She didn't build this. Dad did, I did. She just tagged along." Just like that, 44 years of sacrifice evaporated into a single shrug. The room went still. You could hear the clock ticking. Peter's younger brother Jack looked uncomfortable. Our old accountant coughed and looked down at his lap. My daughter-in-law Vanessa sat back in her chair and smirked, one perfectly manicured hand resting proudly on Ryan's arm. I didn't say a word, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew nothing I said would be heard. You know what that moment felt like? It felt like standing in the house you helped build, only to have someone hand you a broom and say, "You're just the maid here." I glanced around the table, wondering if anyone would speak up, if anyone would say, "Eleanor was there from day one," or "She gave up everything for this family," or even, "Hey, maybe don't humiliate your mother in front of the entire legal team." But no, just silence. That kind of silence that screams louder than words. And in that silence, I felt it. The final snap of a bond I'd spent my whole life protecting. This wasn't just disrespect. This was erasure. Later that evening, when I got home, I stood in the entryway of our house, the one Peter and I bought when Ryan was 7, and it hit me. Ryan didn't see this as our home anymore. To him, I was a placeholder, a formality, a legal footnote in a plan he assumed was already written. It's hard to explain what that kind of dismissal feels like to someone who's never experienced it. But if you're watching this and you've ever felt like your love, your work, your sacrifices weren't enough, then maybe you know. Maybe you've had that moment too. The one where someone you raised, someone you bled for, looks at you like you're nothing. If you have, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. Not for me, but because your story might help another woman realize she's not alone either. The next day, Vanessa called. I didn't answer, so she left a voicemail. "Just wanted to remind you that any instability around the company could impact investor confidence. We're trying to be civil, Eleanor. Let's not make things harder than they need to be." I stared at my phone. Did she really just frame my existence as a threat to the business? Later that week, I ran into my neighbor Lorraine at the grocery store. She asked how I was doing after Peter's passing. I smiled, said I was fine. She leaned in and whispered, "I heard Ryan's taking over the whole company. Must be a relief for you." Relief. I nodded because what else do you do? How do you explain that the child you raised now sees you as an obstacle? I spent the weekend cleaning out Peter's office. It still smelled like him. Old leather, cedarwood cologne, and printer toner. In the bottom drawer, I found a small velvet box. Inside was a pair of pearl earrings, the same ones I'd worn to our 40th anniversary dinner. Underneath was a folded note in Peter's handwriting. "Wear these when it's your turn." I sat down in his chair and cried. Not from sadness, exactly, but from the strange weight of being remembered, after a lifetime of being overlooked. That same night, Vanessa told my grandchildren, Chloe and Miles, that I wasn't feeling well enough to see them this week. She wasn't wrong. But the sickness wasn't in my body. It was in the way my family had rewritten history and deleted me from it. Chloe had drawn me a picture, a house with a garden, a woman with gray hair in the window. I found it crumpled in the trash when I stopped by unannounced to drop off a birthday gift. "She forgot you were coming," Vanessa said. Chloe peeked out from the staircase but didn't say anything. I smiled and left the gift on the table. In the car, I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before driving home, not crying, not shaking, just empty. That kind of hollow you feel when you finally realize they don't see you anymore. Peter once told me, "You keep everything together, Elle. No one sees it, but you do." Maybe he was right. Maybe being unseen was my superpower all along. But even invisible things have limits. And now I was reaching mine. I never thought silence could feel so violent, but that's what it felt like. Sitting in my kitchen at 3:14 a.m., a cold cup of tea in my hand, staring at the doorway like someone might walk through it and tell me none of this was real. That Peter wasn't really gone. That Ryan didn't say what he said. That I hadn't spent a lifetime being useful only to be thrown out like an empty container. No one called that week. Not Ryan, not Vanessa, not the grandkids. It was like I'd become an inconvenient memory, someone they could tuck away behind polite nods and legal documents. Even my house felt smaller, not physically, but in the way it echoed back the truth. I was alone now, not because I had no one, but because no one wanted me. Vanessa sent an email 2 days later titled simply, "For Clarity." It listed what she believed I should expect regarding the estate: Peter's lifetime provision of the house, the car, and a modest allowance from the business account. Nothing more. The rest, she said, was rightfully Ryan's. She didn't use the word inheritance. She used the word entitlement, as if Ryan had earned it, as if I had just lived off the system all these years. I closed the email without responding. That afternoon, I wandered into Peter's study again. I hadn't touched his things since the funeral. His slippers still sat by the fireplace. His glasses were still on the desk, one arm slightly bent from how he always took them off and set them down without looking. I opened the bottom drawer and found a small leather journal I'd never seen before. Inside, the pages were dated, written during the last few months of his life. His handwriting was weaker, more slanted, but still Peter. One entry was addressed to me. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I know I left you with a mess. You spent your life smoothing things over, keeping peace I didn't deserve. I made you invisible. I let Ryan become a man who doesn't know the cost of anything, but I've made arrangements. It's your turn now. Please trust what I've done." I closed the book and sat still for a long time. I should have felt comforted. Instead, I felt grief all over again, because it hit me. Even Peter, who had finally seen me, had waited until the very end to say it out loud. And Ryan? He wasn't just blind to what I'd given. He was actively rewriting history to erase me. Later that week, Sylvia, my sister-in-law, stopped by with a casserole in hand and a sharpness in her voice I had always found strangely comforting. "You look terrible," she said, walking right past me into the kitchen. "I haven't been sleeping well," I said honestly. "No kidding. Ryan's been calling me. Says Peter may have changed the will. Might have left you more than your fair share." She actually air quoted the words. I didn't respond. "Did he?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Peter and I didn't discuss the details." Sylvia gave me a long, slow stare. "You know what I never understood about you, Elle? You let them, Peter and Ryan, walk all over you, and you still defend them." "I did what I thought was right," I murmured. "No, You did what made life quieter, she snapped. There's a difference. I busied myself pouring tea. My hands were shaking. Do you remember when Ryan was 12 and Peter bought him that ridiculous dirt bike you said was too dangerous? He broke his arm, I said quietly. Exactly. Because Peter wouldn't listen. You were always right, Elle. You were right about Ryan. You saw what was coming and you still let Peter shield him from every consequence. Tears welled up, but I didn't let them fall. I tried, Sylvia, when Ryan was in college and he started drinking, failing classes. I wanted Peter to let him face it, but instead he threw money at it, transferred him, covered it up. Yeah, and then gave him a VP title straight out of graduation. I closed my eyes. The first year Ryan worked at the company, he lost a major client. Peter called it a strategic withdrawal to save face. Ryan's never had to earn a single thing in his life, Sylvia said bluntly, and now he thinks he's owed everything, including what you helped build. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. She leaned in, voice softer. Do you want to know the worst part? I looked at her. He's broke. I heard it from someone in accounting. He's leveraged himself to the neck. Private loans, bad investments. He's counting on this inheritance to bail him out. The words dropped like stones in my chest. I wanted to feel vindicated. I didn't. I felt hollow. Because even now, even knowing the truth, I still didn't want to see my son fail. After she left, I went back to Peter's study. I sat at his desk, ran my hand across the smooth wood and whispered, "What did you do, Peter?" He'd said to trust him, that he'd made arrangements, but I didn't know what that meant or what would happen when the truth finally surfaced. All I knew was this: I had been silent for long enough. I had watched my son become the worst version of himself, and I had let it happen, one quiet compromise at a time. Now he was about to face a storm of his own making, and for once, I wasn't going to protect him from it. The morning of the final will reading, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I was nervous, not exactly. It was something else, like the quiet edge before a long overdue storm, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from clarity. I made coffee, sat by the window in Peter's old chair, and watched the garden he used to tend. The hydrangeas were wilting. They hadn't been watered in weeks. Neither had I, really. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. Alan Whitmore stood on my porch in his pressed charcoal suit, holding a leather briefcase and a weariness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Hartley," he said gently, "do you have a moment before the reading? There are some things your husband asked me to explain to you privately." I stepped aside and motioned him in. I didn't need to ask. I already knew. Peter hadn't left things the way Ryan expected. Alan sat across from me at the kitchen table and opened his briefcase slowly. He pulled out a thick file, several legal documents, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Peter's handwriting. He set the envelope aside. "Your husband," he began, "made some significant changes to his estate about 8 months before he passed. These changes were intentional and airtight." He adjusted his glasses and looked at me like a doctor about to give a diagnosis. Peter placed all his company shares, property deeds, and business assets into a legally protected trust. The trustee, the person with full control, is you. I blinked. Me? Yes. You, Mrs. Hartley. I wasn't sure what stunned me more, what he said or how calm I felt hearing it. Alan continued. Ryan assumed he'd inherit everything by default, but Peter was clear. He no longer believed Ryan had the maturity or integrity to manage what he built. I looked down at the table. Peter never said any of this to me directly. "He thought you'd try to stop him," Alan said kindly. "He knew you'd try to keep the peace, as you always have." There it was again, that word, peace, and the weight of how many times I'd chosen it over myself. I was silent as Alan laid out the details, the trust structure, the clause that revoked everything Ryan stood to gain if he challenged the terms, the stipulations ensuring that the grandchildren's futures were protected, regardless of what Ryan or Vanessa did. And then came the part that truly stole my breath. "There's more," Alan said. "Separate from the company trust, Peter left behind a personal portfolio. Investments he quietly built over the past 30 years. Current valuation, $9.5 million does." I sat back in my chair. He let that number hang in the air for a moment before finishing. "That amount was left to you, Mrs. Hartley. Directly. No conditions, no trust, no oversight. It is yours and yours alone." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Seen. After a lifetime of being the support beam everyone leaned on, someone had finally said, "You matter." But Alan wasn't done. "There's one final detail," he said. He pulled out a thin folder labeled Eleanor's Light Foundation. I looked at him, confused. "It's a nonprofit Peter set up before he died. He worked on it with an outside advisor. The foundation provides education grants for women, specifically women who left their careers to support a spouse or raise a family." My hand went to my mouth. "He named it after you," Alan added softly. He said, "You were the light behind everything, even if the world never saw it." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. Peter, my complicated, flawed, too proud husband, he hadn't just left me money, he left me a message, a final act of reparation. "You don't have to say anything now," Alan said, "but I do need to prepare you. Ryan's going to be blindsided. He'll likely contest." "He can't," I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, steady. "You said if he does, he loses everything." Alan nodded. "Let him try," I said quietly. And I meant it, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the conflict. I wasn't going to smooth it over. I wasn't going to apologize for being entrusted with what I helped build. I picked up Peter's envelope but didn't open it. Not yet. That letter could wait. What couldn't wait anymore was me. When we arrived at the law office, the conference room was already full. Ryan sat at the head of the table, confident and smug. Vanessa beside him, in cream-colored silk, her lipstick sharp as a blade. They looked at me like I was just there for show. Alan cleared his throat and began the formal reading. By the time he finished the first section, naming me as sole trustee, Ryan's face had drained of all color. When Alan explained the contest clause, Vanessa's smile dropped. And when he announced the $9.5 million inheritance in my name, a hush fell across the entire room. Ryan leaned forward, stunned. "She gets everything?" I met his eyes. "I already had everything. You just didn't see it." It's strange how power doesn't always feel like thunder. Sometimes it feels like standing in your own kitchen, pouring coffee into your favorite mug, and realizing you don't need to ask anyone's permission to exist anymore. That's how the days felt after the will reading. There was no victory dance, no revenge speech, no dramatic slamming of doors, just stillness. And in that stillness, I began to breathe again. The house, once filled with Ryan's loud opinions and Peter's booming voice, now held something gentler, me, my own voice. Even if it was still soft, it no longer felt drowned out. At the company, I didn't march in and demand a throne. I sat quietly in meetings, listened to every department head, reviewed every financial report with a highlighter and a notebook. Thomas, Peter's old financial advisor, pulled me aside one morning and said, "You don't act like someone in charge." "I'm not here to act, Bamet," I replied. "I'm here to fix what's broken." The team warmed up to me slowly. The older employees remembered how I used to bring homemade cookies to the shop floor. The younger ones were curious but cautious. But respect started to build, not because I asked for it, but because I made steady decisions. No flash, no drama, just calm leadership. One afternoon, I walked through the lobby and passed a young woman on the phone whispering, "She's the founder's wife, but don't let that fool you. She knows exactly what she's doing." I smiled and kept walking. Meanwhile, I hadn't heard from Ryan. Not a word, but I did hear from Chloe. A short email, 2 lines. "Hi, Grandma, can I come over after school?" Just me, not Mom. I cried reading it. When she arrived, I had her favorite strawberry milk chilled in the fridge and the cookie dough already rolled. She looked older somehow, only 12, but holding the weight of things too big for her shoulders. We sat on the back porch, baking in the fading afternoon light. She didn't ask about the will. She didn't ask why her dad was mad. Instead, she looked at me and said, "You always listened when I talked, even when I rambled." I nodded. "I remember everything you've ever told me." She smiled, just barely, then added, "Mom said you were just trying to take what wasn't yours." I took a slow breath. "What do you believe?" I asked her gently. Chloe was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "I believe she's scared. And Dad is angry, and I just miss you." That was all I needed. We spent the next hour making cookies, talking about school, and painting our nails bubblegum pink. Mine chipped horribly, but she said I still looked cool. That weekend, Miles came too. He brought a science project, and I helped him build a working model of a volcano that spewed bright orange baking soda lava all over my counter. It was the most joyful mess I'd seen in years. On Monday morning, Ryan showed up. He didn't call, didn't ask, just knocked, unshaven, eyes hollowed out, shoulders slumped like a man dragging his mistakes behind him. I opened the door. He didn't speak right away. Just looked past me into the living room where his kids' backpacks were lying on the floor. "They've been coming here?" he asked softly. "They reached out," I said. "I just opened the door." He nodded. Then, "Vanessa left, took the savings, said she didn't sign up for financial ruin." I didn't flinch. I just waited. "I've lost the house," he continued. "The Colorado project collapsed. I'm under investigation for misappropriated funds. My name means nothing now." There was something raw in his voice, not just regret, fear. "I don't know who I am without everything Dad handed me," he whispered. I stepped aside and let him in, not because he deserved comfort, but because sometimes letting someone face the consequences requires more strength than shutting the door. He sat on the couch like he didn't belong in his own skin. "I'm not asking for the money," he said quickly, "or the company. I know I lost that." I sat across from him. I need to be someone my kids can respect again. I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time in years, I didn't see a man trying to win. I saw a boy who never had to lose. And now that he had, he didn't know what came next. "If you want to work," I said slowly, "you can start in logistics. Entry level, like anyone else." He looked up, startled. "No title, no office, no favors," I added. "If you're serious, earn it." He swallowed hard. "And if I mess up?" "You're an employee," I said. "You'll be treated like one." He nodded. And that was it. No hugs, no dramatic reunions, just a start. In the following weeks, Ryan clocked in every morning at 6 a.m. He packed boxes, tracked shipments, and took orders from a supervisor 10 years younger than him. Sometimes I saw him in the break room eating alone. Other times, I watched from the office window as he taught Miles how to use a wrench in the garage. He didn't say much, but he was there, present. And that, for now, was enough. I didn't rise from this with applause. No one handed me an award. No one announced my victory. But every time Chloe ran into my arms, every time Ryan turned in a report without being asked, every time I sat at the head of the conference table and felt no need to explain myself, I knew I had come back to life, quietly, proudly, and without apology. Fall came quietly that year. The trees turned without fanfare, just slow, steady shifts of color outside my window. Burnt oranges, deep reds, and a softness in the light that made even my old kitchen feel new again. I liked it that way. No grand ending, no dramatic final act, just change, quiet and true. 3 months had passed since the will reading. The company had stabilized, the team had adjusted, and I had settled into my role, not as Peter's widow or Ryan's mother, but as Eleanor Hartley, the woman who kept everything standing long before anyone noticed. I never raised my voice in a meeting. I never quoted Peter or claimed credit. But when I spoke, people listened. Because now they knew. One morning, a young manager stopped me in the hallway and said, "I just wanted to thank you for staying calm when everything was spinning. You remind me of my grandmother. She was the strongest person I've ever known." I smiled and touched his arm. She probably still is. Ryan had been working in logistics for almost 2 months. He showed up on time. He didn't ask for favors. He didn't even use his last name on the internal roster. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me across the office with something like regret or maybe gratitude. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The words would come when they were ready. What mattered most was this. He was rebuilding, brick by brick. And for the first time in his life, he was doing it without a safety net. As for Chloe and Miles, they had become part of my everyday again. After school, they'd run into the kitchen, their backpacks thudding against the floor. We baked, we talked, we healed. Chloe asked me once, "Did you ever want to be something else? Like, not a mom?" I thought about it. "I wanted to be a teacher," I said. And for a while, I was. But I think deep down, I was always meant to teach something else. Like what? Like how to come back from being forgotten. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached over, squeezed my hand, and said, "You're really good at that." The official launch of the Eleanor's Light Foundation happened at the community center downtown. I almost didn't go. I didn't want to be the center of anything. That had never been my place. But Chloe insisted. "You have to come, Grandma. It's your name, your story." So I went. I sat in the second row, quiet, hands folded in my lap. And when the director spoke my name, talked about the thousands of women who had given up careers, dreams, identities to support others, the whole room stood. Not for applause, not for spectacle, but out of recognition. It wasn't loud, but it was everything. That night, I stood in the garden Peter once tended. The hydrangeas had faded for the season, but their roots were strong. Ryan joined me, his jacket in one hand, the other stuffed nervously in his pocket. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "Thank you." Instead, he simply said, "I see it now, Mom. I see you." I nodded, just once, because after all this time, I didn't need more than that. I won't pretend everything is perfect. There are still pieces to pick up, but I've stopped waiting to be asked. I've stopped hoping someone will hand me my worth, because I already have it, because I always did. It just took losing everything for them to finally see it. To anyone watching, this, if you've ever been overlooked, forgotten, or quietly carried the weight of a family, this story is for you. Have you ever had a moment like Eleanor's? Share it below. Your silence was never weakness. It was strength. Thank you for being here.